eerily quiet rather than burning. The sky signaled the arrival of the invaders. In swift succession, they switched off our nukes, missiles, and lasers, assuming a declawed predator would become easy prey. Yet they overlooked one simple, undeniable truth. Humanity didn't conquer Earth with guns, but with our own hands. The day the world was supposed to end, Thomas Higgins was annoyed about a broken coffee machine. As chief foreman of the Goliath, a 3-million-ton orbital construction platform jointly operated by the Bechtel Corporation and SpaceX Heavy Industries, Thomas had bigger things to worry about than caffeine. He was overseeing the construction of the Artemis orbital ring, a massive infrastructure project requiring the coordination of thousands of drones, tether ships, and asteroid crackers. But in the cold vacuum of space, a good cup of coffee was the only thing keeping his sanity tethered to reality. I was mid-curse, holding a lukewarm packet of instant sludge, when the proximity alarms began to scream. "O'Connor, what did you hit?" Thomas barked, floating into the command center and grabbing a handhold. David O'Connor, a veteran pilot who treated the massive Bechtel construction ships like nimble fighter jets, wasn't looking at his controls. He was staring out the reinforced plasteel viewport. "I didn't hit anything, boss. They just appeared." Thomas followed his gaze. In high orbit, just beyond the moon's gravitational shadow, space was tearing open. It wasn't a subtle phenomenon. Deep purple lacerations in the fabric of reality bled a harsh, actinic light before disgorging a fleet of vessels. They were beautiful, terrifying things, sleek obsidian teardrops, trimmed in glowing gold, devoid of visible thrusters or industrial exhaust. "Comms!" Thomas shouted. "Sarah, get me Earth Defense Command, Admiral Henderson's office." Sarah Jenkins, the Goliath's communications director, was already frantically typing, her face illuminated by the pale blue light of her monitors. "I'm trying, boss, but I'm getting a massive spike in electromagnetic interference. It's washing over the entire planet." Down below, the United Nations Defense Fleet, a proud, heavily armed armada of dreadnoughts and railgun platforms, moved to intercept. Humanity had spent the last 2 decades preparing for the possibility of hostile first contact. Trillions of dollars had been poured into military infrastructure. The pride of the fleet, the UNS Aegis, charged its primary plasma lances. Then the aliens made their move. It wasn't a barrage of lasers. It wasn't a kinetic strike. It was a wave, a pulsing, translucent sphere of rippling gray energy expanded from the flagship of the alien armada. It washed over the human dreadnoughts, rippled past the orbital defense platforms, and blanketed the Earth. On the Goliath, the lights flickered, but the hum of the massive Caterpillar-designed industrial fusion reactor deep in the ship's bowels remained steady. "Report," Thomas demanded. "We're intact," Sarah said, her voice shaking. "But, boss, look at the military bands." Thomas pulled up the tactical feed. It was a graveyard. The UNS Aegis was adrift, its massive engines cold, its plasma lances dead. Across the globe, nuclear silos registered as inert. Fighter jets in the atmosphere were gliding, their advanced targeting and weapons systems completely bricked. The aliens hadn't destroyed the human military. They had simply turned it off. A broadcast overrode every screen on the Goliath, every television on Earth, and every smartphone in humanity's pockets. An alien figure appeared. It was humanoid, with iridescent scales and eyes like polished onyx. Its voice, translated through some highly advanced algorithmic software, was smooth, cold, and dripping with condescension. People of Earth, we are the Vora hegemony. We have deployed a null field across your system. It is designed to instantly neutralize military-grade, fissile material, weaponized plasma generation, and high-velocity kinetic targeting computers. Your weapons are dead. You are utterly defenseless. You have 24 of your Earth hours to transmit your unconditional surrender and submit to hegemony integration. Any attempt at resistance will be met with orbital bombardment. Enjoy your final day of freedom. The screen went black. The command center of the Goliath was dead silent. The unbreakable human military, the shield of Earth, had been swatted aside without a single shot being fired. They were paralyzed. "Sarah," Tom said quietly, the reality of the situation settling like lead in his stomach. "Can you reach Admiral Henderson now?" "Audio only. The military encryption algorithms were wiped by the null field. They're using open radio bands," Sarah replied, flipping a switch. Static crackled, followed by the heavy, exhausted voice of Admiral Henderson. "This is Henderson. Who is on this channel?" "Admiral, this is Thomas Higgins, Chief Foreman on the Goliath. What's our status?" "Status? Our status is we are sitting ducks, Higgins." The Admiral sounded older than his 60 years. "The Vora used some kind of dampener. It specifically targeted the energy signatures of our warheads, our military reactors, and our combat software. Anything classified as a weapon by their algorithms has been permanently fused. We can't fire a single railgun or launch a single missile. The defense fleet is drifting iron." "What about a counterattack? Ground to orbit?" "With what?" Henderson laughed bitterly. "Rifles. They are sitting in high orbit behind energy shields. We are completely helpless. I'm drafting the terms of surrender. God help us all." The line went dead. Thomas floated to the viewport. Below him, the blue marble of Earth looked so fragile. Above him, the Vora fleet sat in perfect, arrogant formation, waiting for humanity to bend the knee. They had disabled every weapon humanity possessed. They had mathematically calculated the exact threat level of the human race and reduced it to 0. Thomas looked down at his console. He looked at the readouts for the Goliath. The fusion reactor was humming. The magnetic grapple tethers were fully charged. The plasma arc mining drills were green across the board. "Anything classified as a weapon," Henderson had said. Thomas smiled. It was a grim, terrifying expression. "O'Connor," Thomas said, his voice dropping an octave. "Run a diagnostic on the Caterpillar Class 4 asteroid drill." O'Connor blinked, confused. "The drill?" "Boss, it's a mining tool. It cuts through solid granite and iron by projecting a 10,000-degree industrial plasma arc. It's working perfectly. The null field didn't touch it." "Why didn't it?" Thomas asked, turning to face his crew. Sarah caught on first. "Because it's not a weapon. It doesn't have a combat targeting computer. It doesn't use weaponized plasma. It uses industrial brute force thermal mechanics." To the Vora's highly advanced automated sensors, the Goliath is just a floating piece of harmless debris. "Exactly," Thomas said. "They disabled our weapons, but they didn't realize that human beings don't need a gun to tear a mountain apart. We just need the right tools." The 24-hour countdown felt like a death knell to the billions on Earth, but in high Earth orbit, it was a frenzy of blue-collar ingenuity. Once Thomas Higgins realized the Vora's null field operated on a strict, bureaucratic definition of what constituted a weapon, He had Sarah patch him through to every civilian construction, mining and salvage foreman operating in the sector. The Vora were ignoring the civilian comms bands entirely, assuming the unarmed apes were simply weeping and saying their goodbyes. Thomas stood in the center of the command deck, a holographic projection table glowing brightly in front of him. Around the table, the faces of humanity's toughest, most stubborn project managers flickered into view. There was Maria Gonzalez, commanding the Komatsu Deep Trench, a magnetic slag dredger designed to pull heavy metals out of pulverized asteroids. There was Viktor Volkov on the Hephaestus, a mobile smelting plant that processed raw titanium. And there were dozens of others, piloting ships built by John Deere's orbital division, Bechtel and Caterpillar. "Listen up," Thomas said, leaning over the console. "The military is down. The Vora think they've declawed us because they broke our guns. But I'm looking at a fleet of heavy-duty industrial machinery that hasn't been touched. They think we're harmless." "We are harmless, Higgins," Volkov rumbled, his thick beard floating in zero-G. "My ship is a flying foundry. I have no armor. I have no lasers. If they shoot me, I explode." "They won't shoot you, Victor, because their sensors are completely ignoring us," Thomas countered. "We aren't registering as threats. We are registering as civilian infrastructure. The Vora are arrogant. They don't look out the window. They look at their tactical screens, and right now their tactical screens say we are 0% dangerous." "So what's the play, Tommy?" Maria asked, narrowing her eyes. "You want us to throw rocks at them?" "I want us to do what we do best," Thomas said. "I want us to do some heavy demolition." Over the next 12 hours, the orbital construction fleet underwent a terrifying metamorphosis. There were no weapon installations, no missiles loaded into bays. Instead, safety protocols were systematically deleted. Limiters were bypassed. The safety guardrails that kept industrial equipment from operating at catastrophic levels were stripped away by mechanics who knew their machines better than they knew their own families. Thomas organized the civilian fleet into a specialized strike force, matching their industrial capabilities to tactical needs. The vanguards, heavy Caterpillar orbital dozers designed to clear thousands of tons of space debris. Their front ends were equipped with meters-thick depleted uranium plating. They were practically indestructible from the front. The tethers, Komatsu salvage ships equipped with industrial gravity tethers and magnetic grapples used to tow errant asteroids. The torches, asteroid crackers like the Goliath, carrying plasma arc drills designed to shear through miles of solid rock in seconds. The foundry, smelting ships like the Hephaestus, carrying thousands of tons of superheated liquid slag. "O'Connor," Thomas called out as the final hour of the countdown approached. "How's our drive output?" O'Connor grinned, his hands flying across the terminal. "I bypassed the Bechtel safety regulators. The main thrusters are currently running at 300% capacity. If we burn this hard for more than 20 minutes, the engine block will melt into slag." "Then we make sure we finish the job in 90, Thomas replied. Sarah looked up from her terminal. "Boss, we have 10 minutes left until the Vora deadline. Admiral Henderson just broadcasted on the open band. He's transmitting the surrender codes." "Block the transmission," Thomas ordered instantly. Sarah hesitated. "Boss, that's treason. I'm overriding a direct order from Earth Command." "Do it, Sarah. If they transmit that code, it's over. We block it, and we buy ourselves the distraction we need." Sarah swallowed hard, but her fingers danced over the keyboard. A localized jamming frequency, repurposed from a mining sonar array, flooded the space between Earth and the Vora fleet. The surrender codes never reached the aliens. At the 5-minute mark, the Vora commander reappeared on the unencrypted channels. "People of Earth, your time has expired. We have not received your surrender. You have chosen defiance. You have chosen destruction. We will now demonstrate the penalty for your primitive stubbornness." The Vora flagship, a massive 3-mile-long dreadnought sitting dead center in their formation, began to glow. Its energy shields flared a brilliant violet, and its primary bombardment cannons began to charge, targeting the eastern seaboard of the United States. "Thomas," Sarah whispered, watching the energy spikes on her monitor. Thomas gripped the railing of the command console. He looked out the viewport at the beautiful, deadly alien fleet. Then he looked at the tactical map, tracking the dozens of bulky, ugly, utilitarian construction ships moving quietly through the debris fields, completely ignored by the alien targeting computers. "Open a fleet-wide channel," Thomas said. Sarah nodded. "You're live." Thomas took a deep breath. "Attention all shifts. The site is live. Overtime is authorized. Hard hats on, gentlemen. Let's go to work." "O'Connor," Thomas roared. "Punch it!" The Goliath shuddered violently as David O'Connor slammed the heavy industrial thrusters to maximum. There was no grace to the ship's movement, no sleek aerodynamic glide. It was 3 million tons of flying steel, propelled by brute, angry force. Across the orbit, the civilian fleet awoke. The Vora tactical sensors, programmed for 1,000 years, to only recognize the specific energy signatures of military weapons, suddenly faced a logic error. To the alien computers, no weapons were being fired. Therefore, there was no attack. But their visual sensors, if anyone had bothered to look, told a very different story. "They're charging main weapons, boss," O'Connor yelled over the deafening roar of the overtaxed engines. 30 seconds until they fire on Earth. "Maria, now!" Thomas shouted into the comms. The Komatsu salvage ships dropped out of the moon's shadow. They didn't fire a single shot. Instead, Maria Gonzalez and her crew activated their industrial magnetic grapples. Invisible tethers of crushing gravitational force lashed out, grabbing on to the Vora escort ships. The aliens relied on energy shields to stop lasers and missiles. They had no defense against a tractor beam designed to haul million-ton iron asteroids. With a sickening lurch, the Komatsu ships reversed their thrusters. The sleek Vora escorts were violently yanked out of formation, spinning out of control, their targeting arrays completely ruined by the sudden shift in trajectory. Panic erupted on the Vora comms. The aliens were scrambling, trying to understand what was happening. Their automated defense systems were entirely dormant. They couldn't shoot back at a threat their computers couldn't classify as a weapon. "Victor! Give them hell!" The Hephaestus moved directly over the Vora flagship. "Opening the crucible!" Victor yelled over the radio. The massive smelting ship opened its ventral cargo doors. It didn't drop a bomb. It vented its waste. 300,000 gallons of superheated, molten titanium slag, burning at 5,000 degrees, poured directly downward into the vacuum of space, right onto the Vora flagship's energy shields. Energy shields are designed to deflect high-velocity impacts and scatter directed energy. They are not designed to hold off a continuous, viscous waterfall of liquid metal. The slag pooled on the invisible barrier, spreading out, cooling rapidly into a heavy, suffocating crust of solid titanium, blinding the flagship's sensors and crushing the shield generators under millions of tons of dead weight. The Vora flagship began to sink in orbit, its thrusters whining as it tried to compensate for the sudden, massive addition to its mass. The bombardment cannons, coated in hardening slag, fused shut. "Shields are down on the flagship!" Sarah screamed, her voice cracking with pure adrenaline. "O'Connor," Thomas said, his eyes locked on the blind, struggling alien dreadnought. "Bring us in. Fire the drill." The Goliath descended like a falling mountain. It wasn't a warship. It was a sledgehammer. And the Vora were the nail. The Goliath did not possess targeting lasers or advanced trajectory software. It relied on the steady hands of David O'Connor and the sheer, unstoppable momentum of 3 million tons of industrial steel. As they plummeted toward the Vora flagship, the proximity alarms howled in a chaotic chorus, screaming about collision trajectories that the ship's civilian computer considered a fatal error. "Override the proximity warnings!" Thomas barked, bracing his boots against the deck grating. "Sarah, give me a structural map of that dreadnought. Where is the null field generator?" Sarah's fingers blurred across her terminal. "I'm tracing the epicenter of the electromagnetic interference. It's coming from their engineering section, mid-aft, just behind the primary command spire. But boss, their hull is made of some kind of quantum lattice armor. We don't even know if the drill can scratch it." "It's matter, Sarah," Thomas said, a grim smile tugging at his lips. "If it exists, Caterpillar can dig through it. O'Connor, put us right on top of that spire." "Brace for impact!" O'Connor roared. The Goliath slammed into the Vora flagship. In the vacuum of space, there was no sound, but the shockwave reverberated through the boots of every crew member on the human vessel. The reinforced, depleted uranium bumper of the Goliath struck the alien hull with the kinetic force of a small asteroid. The quantum lattice armor, designed to dissipate directed energy and deflect high-velocity railgun slugs, simply had no physical answer for a slow, crushing ram by a ship 3 times its mass. The alien dreadnought groaned, its sleek obsidian frame buckling inward under the immense pressure. "Magnetic grapples, engage," Thomas ordered. Massive steel clamps, typically used to secure the Goliath to rotating planetoids, shot out from the human ship's underbelly. They smashed through the decorative gold trim of the Vora vessel, locking the 2 ships together in a deadly embrace. "We are locked on," O'Connor confirmed, wiping sweat from his forehead. "They can't shake us. Fire the main drill." Deep within the Goliath, the Class 4 asteroid drill roared to life. It wasn't an elegant weapon. It was a brutal tool of industry, a confined column of magnetically sealed plasma that burned at over 10,000 degrees Celsius, backed by a physical tungsten carbide bore. A pillar of blinding white fire erupted from the Goliath's ventral bay, slamming directly into the hull of the Vora dreadnought. Inside the alien command center, absolute chaos reigned. The Vora commander, Zia, was thrown from his command pedestal as the entire dreadnought violently pitched. Sparks showered from the immaculate biometric consoles. "Report!" Zia screeched, his iridescent scales flushing a furious crimson. "Why are the automated defenses not firing? Destroy that vessel!" "Commander!" his tactical officer stammered, frantically manipulating a holographic display. "The targeting matrix cannot acquire a lock. The attacking vessel emits 0 weaponized energy signatures. The computer classifies it as harmless debris." "It is melting through our primary hull!" Zia roared, pointing at the tactical readout. The temperature in the upper decks was spiking to catastrophic levels. "Bypass the automated matrix. Manual control. divert all remaining auxiliary power from the shield generators to the secondary plasma batteries and fire manually. Back on the Goliath, the deck was vibrating so hard that rivets were beginning to pop from the bulkheads. "Boss, the drill is chewing through their armor, but we're redlining," O'Connor shouted. "The heat feedback is cooking our own lower decks." "Keep it running," Thomas yelled. "We have to hit that generator." Suddenly, the sensor board lit up crimson. "Thomas," Sarah screamed. "They've figured it out. They've bypassed their targeting algorithms. I'm reading manual power spikes in their secondary batteries. They're aiming right at our bridge." The Vora didn't need a computer to hit a target clamped directly to their hull. 2 secondary plasma turrets swiveled upward, their glowing muzzles locking onto the Goliath's command deck. "They're firing!" Before the Vora could release the lethal plasma bolts, a massive shadow fell over the bridge. "Bechtel heavy dozer ironclad on station, Higgins." A deep southern drawl crackled over the radio. "Thought you boys might need a hard hat." One of the Vanguard-class orbital bulldozers had moved directly between the Vora turrets and the Goliath's bridge. Its front end was a solid, 3-meter-thick slab of depleted uranium meant to push aside volatile space debris at high velocities. The Vora plasma bolts struck the bulldozer's blade. The sheer heat of the weaponized plasma instantly slagged the outer layer of the uranium, sending a massive plume of radioactive steam into the void. But the blade held. It was too dense, too thick, too stupidly heavy to be destroyed by a secondary battery. "Blade's taking a beating, but we're holding the line," the Vanguard pilot reported calmly. "Keep digging, Tommy." "You heard him, O'Connor," Thomas yelled, slamming his fist onto the console. "Max power to the drill." "Burn them out." The plasma arc bore pierced the inner hull of the Vora dreadnought. It didn't just cut, it incinerated everything in its path, violently expanding the atmosphere within the alien ship and turning their pristine corridors into blast furnaces. "We are through the armor," O'Connor yelled. 30 meters to the null field generator." On the Vora dreadnought, Commander Zia watched in absolute horror as the structural integrity of his invincible flagship disintegrated. Their energy shields were useless, buried under a hardening tomb of titanium slag from the human foundry ship. Their escorts were being thrown around like toys by gravity tethers. And now, a primitive, brutish mining rig was physically anchored to his vessel, steadily drilling a hole into its heart. "Commander!" the tactical officer gasped, coughing as smoke filled the pristine bridge. "The thermal drill is approaching the null field generator. If it breaches the containment housing, the generator will detonate. We will lose the dreadnought." Zia's eyes narrowed into slits of pure malice. The humiliation was unbearable. The Vora hegemony did not lose to unarmed apes. They did not retreat from construction equipment. "Overload the ship's core," Zia ordered, his voice cold and final. "Set a collision course for the planet's surface. If we are to fall, we will take their pathetic world with us." "Commander, that will kill us all." "Do it." On the Goliath, Sarah's monitors erupted in a frantic cascade of red warnings. "Boss!" Sarah's voice was laced with genuine panic. "The Vora flagship is changing trajectory. They're firing their main thrusters, and they're dragging us with them. They've locked in a descent vector. They're going to ram Earth." Thomas looked out the viewport. The blue expanse of the Pacific Ocean was slowly rotating into view, growing larger by the second. The alien dreadnought, despite being crippled and covered in hardening slag, still had incredibly powerful engines. It was pushing itself and the Goliath attached to it out of orbit. They're trying to turn their whole ship into a kinetic kill vehicle, Thomas realized, his blood running cold. If 3 million tons of alien metal hits the atmosphere at this angle, the shockwave will wipe out half the hemisphere. "I can't detach us," O'Connor shouted, fighting the controls. "The magnetic grapples are fused. The heat from the drill melted the release mechanisms. We're stuck to them." "How much time until we hit the atmosphere?" Thomas demanded. 4 minutes, Sarah replied, gripping her console. Thomas looked at the drill's depth gauge. They were 10 meters away from the null field generator. The drill was slowing down, the tungsten carbide tip finally wearing away against the incredibly dense alien alloys protecting their engineering bay. "We won't breach it in time," O'Connor said, his voice grim. "Boss, we're going down with them." "No," Thomas said quietly. "We aren't." He grabbed the fleet-wide comms receiver. "Victor, Maria, I need every tether, every grapple, and every cable you have. The flagship is making a suicide dive for Earth. Anchor them." Across the orbital battlefield, the civilian fleet responded. They didn't hesitate. They didn't ask for authorization. Dozens of Komat's salvage ships swooped in, dodging erratic, manual fire from the panicked Vora escorts. They fired their industrial gravity tethers, latching on to the plunging dreadnought. Heavy John Deere tow rigs shot physical plasteel cables, wrapping them around the alien hull. "Engaging reverse thrusters," Maria Gonzalez yelled over the comms. "Pull, you stubborn bastards! Pull!" The collective engines of 50 heavy industrial ships flared white-hot. They were fighting the gravity of Earth and the massive engines of the Vora flagship. The descent slowed. The metal of the alien dreadnought groaned and shrieked as opposing forces threatened to tear it apart. "It's not enough," Sarah yelled. "They're still dragging us down." Thomas stared at the readout for the Goliath's Caterpillar fusion reactor. It was rated for a stable output of 10 gigawatts, carefully regulated to prevent a meltdown. "O'Connor," Thomas said, his voice deadly calm. "Bypass the reactor's containment regulators. Reroute all safety coolant away from the core and dump it directly into the plasma drill." O'Connor froze. "Boss, if I dump the coolant into the drill, the thermal shock will fracture the bore housing. It'll cause a localized directional explosion straight down into their ship. But without coolant, our reactor will go critical in exactly 60 seconds. "Do it," Thomas ordered. "We crack their generator. We drop the null field. It's the only way." O'Connor didn't argue. He typed the commands. Deep within the Goliath, the massive cooling valves slammed shut. Thousands of gallons of super-chilled liquid helium were forcefully redirected into the superheated plasma bore. The laws of thermodynamics took over. The catastrophic thermal shock shattered the tungsten carbide bore. A massive directional explosion of compressed plasma and expanding gas fired downward like a shaped charge, ripping through the final layers of the Vora armor and plunging directly into the null field generator. A blinding flash of violet light erupted from the alien dreadnought. The shockwave shattered every viewport on the Goliath. "Generator destroyed!" Sarah screamed over the deafening alarm klaxons. "The null field is down." Down on Earth, in the dark, silent command center of the UN Defense Fleet, Admiral Henderson sat with his head in his hands. Suddenly, the room was bathed in light. The tactical holotable flared to life. The hum of military-grade fusion reactors echoed through the bunkers. "Admiral!" a young lieutenant shouted, jumping from his seat. "The null field just collapsed. Primary weapons are online. Targeting computers are active." Admiral Henderson looked at the orbital map. He saw the massive Vora fleet, now visible and vulnerable. And he saw the swarm of human construction ships holding the flagship back from the brink of the atmosphere. Henderson's eyes hardened. "Launch everything." It was a slaughter. With their shields crushed by slag, their formation broken by tow ships, and their flagship crippled, the Vora fleet was entirely unprepared for the sudden, furious resurrection of the human military. Hundreds of railgun slugs, moving at a fraction of the speed of light, tore through the alien escorts. Nuclear-tipped interceptors hammered the remaining dreadnoughts. "Surrender." "Boss," Sarah said, coughing through the smoke on the Goliath's bridge. "Earth Command has secured the sector. The Vora are standing down." Thomas slumped into his command chair, wiping blood from a cut on his forehead. The ship's internal sirens were blaring, warning of the impending reactor meltdown. "O'Connor," Thomas breathed heavily, "re-engage the coolant. Let's not blow ourselves up after winning the war." O'Connor chuckled, a strained, exhausted sound, and punched the command. The reactor temperature slowly began to drop. "Coolant re-engaged, boss. We're stable." Thomas looked out the shattered viewport at the ruined, smoking husk of the alien dreadnought they were still clamped to. Earth hung beautifully in the background, safe and untouched. The aliens had calculated humanity's exact military strength. They had neutralized the threat with cold, perfect logic. But they had failed to understand the human spirit. They didn't realize that the people who build a civilization are always the ones most willing to tear heaven and earth apart to protect it. Thomas sighed, leaning back in his chair. "Sarah." "Yes, boss?" "Tell Bechtel we're going to need a new coffee machine for the break room." Did you love this story of human ingenuity and sheer industrial grit? The aliens thought we were defenseless, but they forgot that humanity's greatest strength is our ability to build and destroy. If this HFY sci-fi drama got your adrenaline pumping, don't forget to hit that like button, share this video with your fellow sci-fi fans, and subscribe to the channel for more epic tales of humanity proving the galaxy wrong. Leave a comment below on what construction equipment you'd pilot.